And again, this comes back to that. What are you expecting from the relationship versus what is the person providing? And it's so critical up front to be clear on that. Your level of happiness is the difference between expectations and reality. Whatever you think is going to happen, whatever that is, you set that. And then whatever else happens, that delta is going to equal your level of happiness or dissatisfaction. So if what happens is above that line, you're probably going to be happier. Although ironically enough, sometimes when you get more than you expect, you're still unhappy because you don't trust what you get. I don't know if you've ever been in the situation where you're like, you told me I get 100, but I'm getting 110 back. Why is that? And you thought, I'm giving you 10 more dollars. Yes, but why are you giving me 10 more? And so to some extent, right, it doesn't really matter, but it is that difference between what we expect and what we get. And so that's why it is so critical in any relationship, not just accounting, but anyone you're working with, that you both understand what is going to be provided by each, how you're going to interact with each other, so that the difference between what happens and what you expect is minimal, if not equal. And then what we find is that customers and clients end up being very happy because they're getting what they expect.
All right, welcome to another episode of Medical Entrepreneur. We are very honored and excited to have Nolan Bradbury here with us. Nolan is an expert accountant and CPA. He has an insight into what is normally a very dull and boring topic for a lot of us. And Nolan can help us understand why it's so important to use accounting to our best interests. And Nolan, if you could maybe just tell everyone a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your backstory.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Adam. Excited to be here. And a quick public service announcement. Thank you to everyone who stayed through when you said accountant and stuck with me at this point. I promise I will try to make this as lively as possible. So yes, I am a CPA by trade, certified public accountant. I have a little over 2 decades worth of experience in both the public and private sector. On the public side, worked a lot with taking companies public and managing their reporting. And then for the last 12, 13 years, I've been focused exclusively on working with small business owners, entrepreneurs, founders, to provide them the same level of expertise that bigger companies often get, but is sometimes cost prohibitive or unavailable or maybe unknown how to get for smaller businesses. And we utilize that to help them grow their business and accomplish the goals they want, both professionally and personally. My background is not in tax per se, but I know enough about it to help business owners and identify the challenges that often come with that.
Awesome. And so for a lot of people that start their own practice and their own business, accounting is like the last thing they focus on because they have so many other fires, like getting customers in the door, making sure they can meet payroll, that kind of thing.
Yep.
Could you maybe describe for a typical medical entrepreneur who is often by themselves, they're wearing multiple hats, they're the provider, they're the business owner, they're the chief marketing officer,
Yeah.
to the chief janitor.
Yeah, exactly. Chief janitor, taking out all that stuff. Yeah.
What would be the best way what do you recommend for them to get started with accounting? Like what would you normally see as part of their journey?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple pieces that play into this. And I should have prefaced this up front. When I went to college, I actually wanted to be a psychologist. So a lot of the way that I approach accounting is from a more mental, emotional standpoint than, say, a lot of CPAs approach this, because I understand the relationship that tends to come with money and how personal it can be and into who we are. So part of what I would say is the key when you're starting out, and whether you're on your own or you have a team that's small and growing, is it's important to remember at the end of the day, you need to be focused on only the things that you can do for you or your business or your clients. So if you're a medical practitioner, there are certain things that you can't outsource, right? Like you can't necessarily outsource the things that you know best right away. And to be able to do all the things that need to be done in a business, from taking out the trash to managing the marketing strategies and all that, it's important that you identify the areas where you don't have to be the person that does that work. And one of those is accounting. It comes down to the idea that we often don't know what we don't know. And if we're able to own that and acknowledge that and be humble with the idea that, like, I'm not an expert at everything. I'm a smart person. I can probably logic my way through a lot of this, but I'm not an expert. Then we are, I think, more open to and less resistant to the idea of bringing someone else in who is an expert, who can take over these things. And from that, not only remove the financial, the emotional and mental burden that comes with having to do something that you aren't an expert at or don't necessarily enjoy, but also can maybe turn that into an opportunity where, because that's being taken over by someone else, you can actually generate more for the business from a revenue perspective, because you're utilizing your time in the best way possible.
That makes a lot of sense. I know also for a lot of small, say, medical spas, practices, et cetera, a lot of times though, the people reach out to me and say, hey, I'm at this level. I want to get to the next level. What do I do? And I'll start asking them some basic questions. And most of the time, they don't know their numbers at all, or the very minimum, like just not very well. Are there anything that is there anything that you'd recommend regarding that? Are there any numbers they should constantly know, et cetera?
Yeah. So first thing I would say is if you find yourself, if that resonates with you, if you're nodding your head to what Adam just said, then I would say you are not alone, right? You're actually in the majority, and that most business owners, and there's a lot of surveys and studies that show this, they will tell you that the thing they hate most about running their business is the accounting finance aspect of it. Okay. If that's how you feel, you're not alone. The problem with that though, right, is that kind of what you just described is it makes it very challenging to answer a lot of the things that you need to answer to grow the business past the point you're at. And I often differentiate, it's the difference between intuition and data-driven decision-making, meaning that intuition will get you to a certain point, but at a certain point, it wears itself out. And to get past that hurdle, we often have to start making our choices based upon actual data and numbers and facts and so forth to be able to know what the best outcome is. How do we do that? The first thing, again, is somewhat owning the idea that part of the reason why you don't know the numbers is because you don't like the numbers, meaning that we often avoid the things we don't like. And because of that, it's not a priority to us. So it tends to take a back burner. Why we don't like the numbers ranges from a handful of things that I've found over the years, but it usually comes down to a couple categories. So first off, the information that they've gotten in the past has been incorrect. And so they don't trust it inherently. And so why am I going to spend time on something when it doesn't actually tell me what I need to know? Second thing is maybe the information is correct, but it doesn't make any sense to them. And this is a hard one, right? Because there's an element of shame to it that we may feel as a human being where I'm a business owner, I'm a smart person, I should know what this means. And yet I don't. And so it's hard for us sometimes to look at that information and say, I need to understand this. And so because of that, we tend to have a tough relationship with it. And the third one is that what we're being given isn't being presented to us in a way that is useful for us. So each person learns differently. We all interpret data a little bit differently. And yet what often ends up happening is the information we get, especially in an accounting and finance aspect, all looks the same. It's designed by accountants or accountants, but most often the target audience is not an actual accountant, right? And so part of what has to be solved is we have to put it in a format that is actually usable and meets the business owner at their level of expertise. And that's not talking down to them. That's not patronizing. It's actually going, okay, how do you learn? How do you interpret? When you think about your business, how do you view it from a profitability standpoint, right? And so it's important to understand which one or multiple of those boxes you fall into, because then that allows us to actually address the problem, right? And so maybe the problem is the professional you're working with doesn't meet you at the level we need to. And so maybe it's about, they may be very qualified and competent, but they're not the right relationship, right? Like same thing if you're dating someone. They may be a great person, but they may not be the right fit for you. It doesn't mean either of you are bad. It just means it's not the right situation. Perhaps it's a matter of we need to tweak the way you're getting the data. Great. Let's do that for you so that you can make it. So we first identify what is the resistance? Where is the thing that's challenging us to get to that point? Then we can start to solve that problem by addressing that head on. And then what we find is once you get through those hurdles, people start to lean in more to the data because you've removed the resistance to it and they start to see actually the value that's coming out of it. I was recently working with a dentist. He was doing pretty well, doing like about $300,000 a month in revenue. And we started working more closely together in terms of really helping him understand the relationship between his revenue and the costs that were associated it. And so he could really start to dial in and understand, like, why am I not seeing the profit I want, even though the revenue is increasing? And through that process over the last 3 to 6 months, what we've seen is his revenue go from about $300,000 a month to about $550,000 a month and profit following it, meaning that he was breaking even before. Now he's getting closer to $150,000, $200,000 in profit per month. And it isn't that I did that for him per se, right? I'm not going to take credit for that. It's a function of what we did was we removed the things that were challenging for him to make the best of business decisions for himself. And so we simplified everything such that he could get the outcome.
Man, that's really great. Because like that, I see that a lot, especially in medical practices where many times people are doing different types of procedures or they're offering different service lines and they don't necessarily even know how profitable they are. And then a lot of times, like this is what happened with my own practices. Like when we started to really delve into the data financially, we realized like, whoa, some of these services that we're doing, like they're not even profitable or they are like slightly profitable, but nothing like this other service line we could do. So that's a huge win.
Yeah. And to that point, and that's sadly, we see that more than I would like to, right? Which is our perception as a business owner. And this is like that intuition versus data-driven decision-making, right? Is our intuition is, oh, this is the offering that is most profitable for our clients. And we forget sometimes all the hidden costs that come along with that, providing that service, right? And because of that, what we don't realize also is the downstream implications from that sort of falsity which is maybe we start allocating more marketing resources to that. And so we're ramping up our spend for something that isn't going to generate not only the return, but really maybe a profit in general. Maybe we hire more people to provide that service. Now we've just loaded up a cost to an already less profitable option. And that's ignoring some of the soft costs that come with that, which is your time as a business owner, the managing of all those people, the ramping up of all that. And so that is 100% a very common theme we see, which is I don't mean to sound critical, like a misplaced trust in what we think is the most profitable aspects of our business. And sometimes we have loss leaders and that's a different situation. But I think fundamentally, we don't want to be doubling down on something that isn't actually going to be doubling our efforts or our results, right?
That's so true. And I saw this a lot in medical spas with a lot of filler treatments. So a lot of people do the dermal fillers.
Yes.
And they say, oh, the ticket or the revenue seems very high, but they're not looking at their cost because the cost of the product itself is also very high. Yeah. Not including the time, et cetera. And so for many of the practice owners, by the time they pay for the product and their time and the effort and the overhead, what they're really, in many cases, their fillers were like the lowest margin product they had.
Yeah. And the opportunity cost, as you refer to right there, right, is it isn't just that the service maybe is not as profitable as you think, but it also means that you're giving up a more profitable service for that one, right? And so you're not just losing money, but you're also losing the other money that you would have possibly made on the other offering because you didn't do it, right? Oftentimes you're not just taking capacity, you're actually swapping capacity out or swapping one for another. And so it's a compounding effect that can happen.
Man, that is so true. That's a really great point. But what I'm thinking now is, okay, the person listening to this has their own practice. Yeah. They're like, okay, I know I need to do this. I've been pulled in 1,000 directions. I have like almost no time for myself. Nolan, please help me. What do I do? What's the first step? How do I go from this managed chaos to like something where I can have clarity so I can make decisions on a business level?
So oftentimes the question, I'll answer that one, and maybe this is too early in the process that you're referring to, but I think the question I often get a lot from people is, okay, great. I'm on board to hire someone. How do I know it's the right person? Like there's all these people out there. Like, how do I find the right one? This is a very difficult question, if I'm being honest, right? Because what you're basically asking is yourself to be an expert in an area you're not an expert in enough to hire that person to be your expert. So you're underqualified to hire this person that is going to be an expert for you. And that is a sort of weird like scenario that you're having to ask for yourself. So a couple things I'll share. One, talk to other peers in your industry and see if they are willing to share with them experiences they've had, either negative or positive, right? So if they have a referral, if there's someone they trust, oftentimes there are specialists in industries who are more familiar with certain things and can be an expert that you can start with. And maybe that's not the right person, but at least it puts you on a path towards narrowing the scope of who you're talking to, right? If you're hiring an accountant in this scenario, go out to your state's Board of Accountancy site. Every state has one that oversees accounting. Look to see, and it may sound really silly, but look to see if there's been any claims against that account. Are they like trustworthy? Are there a bunch of complaints from people alleging nefarious things? That's probably not someone you want to engage with, right? The third thing I would say, stay away from family recommended people. And the reason I say that is family and business rarely, if ever, gel together. And what you don't want to mesh is your money with a family relationship that's going to be hard for you to make a decision you may not like to make, but it's best for you as a business. So sometimes early on, we have a sister or a cousin or someone who's a CPA and they're helping us out, and that's fine. But if you're getting to a point where you're trying to go the next level, it's probably best to divest yourself of that relationship so that both parties are free of the burden that sometimes comes with that type of situation. If that makes sense. The other piece, and this kind of goes back to something I was alluding to why relationships don't work, is be honest with yourself about how you want to engage with this person and what your expectations are. Don't lie to yourself, to the person you're interviewing, because you want it to be a good fit. If you are someone who you're in meetings a lot, maybe you're servicing clients a lot, and the best way to get a hold of you is, say, texting, don't go hire a CPA that doesn't have a text number. Like that, you're right out of the box. Like you're putting yourself in a bad position, right? So like, it's important to ask these types of questions that what are going to make the relationship as healthy for you, setting that tone up front. asking them, what can I expect from you in terms of communication? How will you ask questions for me? Is it appropriate for me to delegate some of these questions to someone on my team? What are the reports that I can expect to get? Like, it is totally reasonable to ask all of those questions. And it isn't that the CPA or the person you're interviewing has to have specific answers to all of those. But if they're not able to address them in some capacity, then that should be maybe a bit of an indicator that this may not be the right relationship. And the other thing I would tell you is treat it as a serious interview. So treat it as though you're hiring an employee. Now, you're not hiring an employee, right? But anytime you hire someone or engage someone to support your business, there is going to be a level of time that you have to invest for that person to be successful. And an accountant is no different. An attorney is no different. A marketing agent is no different. They all are going to require some component of your time, more so in the beginning, but also on an ongoing basis. It is not a complete offloading of responsibility. And I think that's probably the most important thing to level set expectations on. If you hire me, for example, to do your accounting for you, I'm going to be very honest with you. And I tell you, we can do like 95 to 97% of the stuff without needing your, but there's always going to be 3 to 5% that I'm going to have to ask you because either it's new or we don't have enough information to do it. And you have to be comfortable with that. That you still have to be a part of that process to be able to get the information to a point that it can be usable and beneficial to you.
That's a really great point. And one of the things that I see a lot of business owners getting is just like you said, they'll get a referral, or someone will say, oh, my cousin's a CPA, or they can do your books and that kind of thing. And then what they end up getting back is a very confusing report. Oftentimes it's not connected to anything. So we're not talking about like QuickBooks kind of thing. It does something to me where I'd get like this like PDF and it's had a whole bunch of numbers on it. Yeah. I'm like, could this be right? Yeah. Because I'm looking at the numbers, like they don't correlate to what I'm seeing practically in the business. And I'm like, did they get it wrong or did not add it right? And then you're at the state of confusion. Any advice that you have for someone who's not an expert, like how they might organize their books, or how they might take all this financial information and organize it in a way that they can review it and it makes sense for them and correlates to what they see in the business?
Yeah, it's a great question. So if you're starting out and you're going to have to, you're in the DIY phase of things, right? Which most business owners start out at that point, some regards or another. I would say that even in that state, if you can, I would hire a professional to set up the ecosystem for you, because getting off on the right foot is so critical to anything. What you don't want to have happen is not know you didn't do certain steps that you needed to take and then find out years down the road that there were implications of it, or that you didn't set things up correctly. And then it comes tax time and what all the things that you're working under the premonition of fail to be true. So I do think there is real value in the beginning, regardless of where you're at in the DIY versus done with you versus do it for you phase of things. That is one area I think is really important to invest in, just to make sure that you get set up in the right place. And then ideally, in most of those relationships, that person can be someone you go back to ask a one-off question, right? So maybe you're like, hey, if you set this up for me, are you available to answer questions from time to time? And usually you can structure some sort of relationship that will sort of accommodate that support, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
I think in terms of how you set up the business, what's important, and so I'll leverage what I just said. Say you hire someone, any person you hire, one of the questions or one of the very first questions they should ask you when they're helping you design that thing is going, how do you view the business? Meaning like when you think about the profitability of the business, how do you interpret it? And then we use that as a framework to translate that into what the numbers are going to tell us, whether it's the setup of the profit and loss statement by the expense categories, the types of revenue, or maybe it's setting up a few key performance indicators, KPIs, or metrics that are very good indicators of a high level assessment of the health of the business. It starts with, again, understanding how the business owner or the practitioner understands their own business, so that when they look at it, to the point you just made, Adam, right, is that what they get back actually connects with what they are expecting, right? You don't want to give someone Latin when they speak English back in the report. And it's oftentimes when people get back just financial statements, this is gibberish to me as the business owner. What am I supposed to do with this? Like, one, I'm not even really sure what I'm looking at. And two, if I don't understand it, what then? What is the next step? And I think it's important to work with someone, have that. If you are doing it yourself all the way along, there are some good tutorial videos out there. YouTube is a vast marketplace of like information that you can go find. And there's a lot of videos you can watch to do that. I sometimes think though, the trade-off of trying to do it yourself at that point where watching the videos and trial and error and that it starts to be as cost prohibitive as maybe what you think it is to go hire someone to do it, right? What is your time in the after hours of your practice versus having someone do it and get it done quickly? I think that's the analogy I always describe is it's like trying to general contract a home remodel versus hiring a GC to do it. We all think that we were capable enough to do it on our own. I can do this. I'm going to save money. I'm going to save time. And then you're like, I don't know how to hire a flooring expert. I don't know if this person is going to show up on time. What happens when they don't show up on time? And what I get is not what I want. It's like all these things get opened up, but the reality is get that set up, have someone oversee it, make sure it's the right place. And then hopefully then it becomes a bit more manageable for you as the business owners take care of.
Absolutely. And I think you really bring up a really good point, which is just like you were saying, to work with people to build this kind of reporting or information that corresponds to what they see is like huge, because I don't see most accountants ever doing anything like that. Like they don't ask me things. Hey, send me your financials, log into your bank, print out each of the statements, mail them to me. And unfortunately, like I see a lot of people, they many times, unless they actively take a role in the finances of their practice or their business, like many times they're just blindsided by like a huge tax bill or something like this. Is there any recommendations that you have for someone who maybe they're just getting started, they wanted to find somebody like you mentioned before to set up things for them? Is that something that you could do for them? Is that good to reach out to you and be like, hey, I'm running my practice. I think I'm making money, but I'm not really sure. Can you help me set up the basics?
Absolutely. So we do offer the setting up of work. You know there was a point in our career or in my career where I realized that I am best able to serve clients who I'm not their first accountant. And the reason I say that, not because I don't like working with people as their first accountant, but fundamentally, the first time you hire any professional, you often don't know the best way to utilize them or interact with them. And I found that it was challenging for me to deliver the level of quality and support that I wanted to, not because of the client, but because it's such a new process to them that it was like I would ask them questions they wouldn't necessarily know how to properly answer, and that would create friction. So short answer is yes, we do help people set that up. But if you're just starting out, that's probably all my firm is going to be able to take care of for you. And that there are probably other, I'll say, options at that size that can help you in the intermediate future. As you get bigger, as you become a bit more complex, we do offer services that are a bit more in line with that, where we offer compliance type work, which is really just handling the bookkeeping, if you will, on an outsourced basis. And then we can layer on more advisory type work, which is really helping the business owner make the best decisions for the business. And then we have another level, which is more strategic in nature, because a lot of accountants, and I don't mean this like negatively of them, but they look, everything is always usually the prior year or prior month, things like that. But what business owners really benefit from the most is utilizing historical trends to understand what may happen in the future and how we can be dynamic and adjust to it. So short answer, yes. Longer answer, it depends on where you're at in the life cycle of your business.
One of the things I wanted to ask you also about was, what would you normally, like if you had a brother that had their own business or medical practice, was there a certain system that you'd recommend that they use to store their financial information?
Yeah. So there's a lot of software out there. Most of it is now cloud-based. I would say I would recommend utilizing a cloud-based software as opposed to a desktop, more traditional software, largely because we work in such a remote environment now, partly because of COVID, partly because of just the technology that exists, that you're going to open yourself up to a lot more resources by being able to access the information remotely as opposed to like on site. Then, so from the sort of cloud-based software, the biggest player in the market is Intuit's QuickBooks Online account. I tend to recommend it largely because if you need to switch providers or you need to add in, say, a third-party application to sync in like via API, it's like the Apple iPhone of that industry, right? Like everything is designed around the QuickBooks Online ecosystem. And so there are the most professionals who know how to use it. There are the most third-party applications that integrate with it. And so it usually provides you the most flexibility over the long run. There are other solutions, don't get me wrong. And I don't mean that they aren't viable ones, but if you're just looking for like broad brushstrokes, what's going to give you the most flexibility now versus say 2-3 years from now, it's probably going to be QuickBooks Online, at least at this current stage.
That makes a lot of sense. That's what we use. So that was right. And
reaffirming your decision. There you go.
It's also what I've made a million mistakes with, because we used to get reports, like I mentioned before, in PDFs. And I was like, what does this stuff mean?
Yeah.
And then I tried to understand, like, where's this number coming from? And then there's no way to drill down or figure it out. Whereas with QuickBooks, we can see that. So
It's a bit more dynamic, right? Like it is an actual like live software. So you're able to actually, like you said, drill down into stuff and get more detail.
One question I think is always been something I've personally, struggled with, and I think a lot of people struggle with, which is like the division of accounting. So what is accounting versus bookkeeping?
Yeah.
When do you have a bookkeeper in-house versus letting the accountant do the bookkeeping for you?
Yeah.
I've also noticed that I was looking at some of my bills for accounting, and it seems like bookkeeping is a big charge by a lot of the accountants. So it's definitely a moneymaker for the accounting firms. But like a lot of times I feel like the bookkeepers I get from the accounting firms, they're so remote, like they're not, like I can't go every day and be like, hey, this week, show me exactly what our P&L is for this week. They don't have that. Like they're, like you said before, looking backwards. They're like months behind or whatever. Any advice regarding how to structure bookkeeping versus accounting and that kind of thing?
So first thing, what do all those words mean? The short answer is nobody knows, Adam. It's a mystery. No. So it is funny that you say that though, because that is one of the things I would say, I don't want to say is a hurdle, but when I meet with someone, I'm always very intrigued by when you say accounting, what does that mean to you? Because it could mean a whole host of different things, right? Similarly, what does bookkeeping mean to you? What does tax mean to you? Are those interchangeable? Are they different? So the short answer is yes, they are all interchangeable. Unfortunately, there is no standard definition of what one represents. I would say if I was to simplify it, like accounting is like the highest overarching umbrella. And then below that, you have the specialties of say tax preparation, tax planning, bookkeeping. And then even under that, there are smaller things like payroll and other aspects of the business. In terms of the question about how do you set up the structure? You refer to, they seem to be days, week behind. What goes into that? Because it can sometimes feel like a black box in terms of you're paying for the service, what's really included in that? What does that mean in the grand scope of what I get versus when it happens and so forth? Again, this is a bit of an unfortunate thing. I think every service provider has a little bit of a different definition and I'll say different level of service level agreement. And so what they agree to versus what you are expecting can sometimes be misaligned. Not to self-promote, but I will say how we tend to approach is what I tell clients is we assign a day of the week for every client, meaning that so if you came on to me as a bookkeeping client, I would say, okay, Tuesday, we're going to do everything we can for you that Tuesday. So we're going to enter all the activity. We're going to reconcile any accounts we can. We're going to update any reports we can. If you have more advanced sort of reporting and you're getting data on a more frequent basis, say weekly, that will be updated. So there's a clear level of what you're getting from this. Right. So we always try to define that. And then you move into on a monthly basis, making sure that what we refer to as closed procedures, meaning the monthly reconciliation, saying, okay, we did all this activity in the moment, but now we need to make sure that it's actually, there's no other sort of questions that are outstanding. I think it's important that gets done within the first 5 to 10 business days of the month at the latest. Again, sometimes it falls on what day of the week for us that you get assigned to when the first of the month is. But I think it's important. Again, this comes back to that. What are you expecting from the relationship versus what is the person providing? And it's so critical up front to be clear on that. One of the things I tell people, I tell my kids this too, which is your level of happiness is the difference between expectations and reality. So whatever you think is going to happen, whatever that is, right? You set that. And then whatever else happens, that delta is going to equal your level of happiness or dissatisfaction. So if what happens is above that line, you're probably going to be happier. Although ironically enough, sometimes when you get more than you expect, you're still unhappy because you don't trust what you get, right? I don't know if you're ever in the situation where you're like, well, you told me I get 100, but I'm getting 110 back. Why is that? And you're like, this doesn't seem right. And you say, but I'm giving you $10 more. Yes, but why are you giving me 10 more? And so to some extent, it doesn't really matter, but it is that difference between what we expect and what we get. And so that's why it is so critical in any relationship, not just accounting, but anyone you're working with, that you both understand what is going to be provided by each, how you're going to interact with each other so that the difference between what happens and what you expect is minimal, if not equal. And then what we find is that customers and clients end up being very happy because they're getting what they expect.
Absolutely. And I really like the quote you have. So basically the difference or happiness is determined by the difference between your expectations and what you actually receive, right?
Yeah.
And so that's very important. That being said, what would you recommend that most business owners do in order to set the expectations for the vendors they work with for like accounting? Is there any advice that you say, okay, you need to have these 5 things or?
So let's talk about like on the bookkeeping front side of things, because there's a couple, like I would say, core pillars of what should be included. So there's recording of activity, right? So at a minimum, you need to make sure that it is being recorded. You need to make sure that every account you have is reconciled. And by every, I do mean every, not every bank account, not every bank account credit card, but every account. This is where I see a lot of businesses get into trouble, is that there are accounts that get ignored or neglected, and they oftentimes have very large impacts on profitability, taxability, and so forth. So really, we want to look at every account of the balance sheet needs to be reconciled or reviewed. You want to understand, what is it you're going to provide to me in terms of results? How am I going to get that? What format is it going to be in? When can I expect it by? Those are reasonable questions to ask, right? You're just asking for a baseline of what I can expect. The other piece that I would say then is asking them what is not included. So meaning, okay, so you're outlined all these things, but again, since you're not an expert in this, you don't know what may or may not be included. So it's reasonable to ask the question like, are there services that normally get included with this that I am not going to get? And if so, why is that not included in what I need? Are there things that like I may need to add later on? Are there things that may cause my scope of service to have to increase in the future? Like those are all very important questions, I think, to be able to answer that question.
That's really great. I think that's really important because nobody usually does that. And then they're surprised later. So I think you have a lot of wisdom there.
And again, like not to shamelessly promote, but how we have tried to solve that problem for our clients is when we onboard someone in the bookkeeping realm of things, we basically provide them a responsibility checklist, which is here's all the things that are going to happen within the scope of services that you have, and here's who's responsible for. And it's literally us, it's the business owner, maybe it's an assistant on their team. Here's the frequency with which it's happening. And just to really, and then we have them sign it. I know that sounds silly, but we really want to make sure that there's no confusion on what's going to happen so that they have the peace of mind of not having to worry. It's less about our own liability, although that is a component of it, but it's more about, I just want you hired me. That was a tough decision for you. I want you to walk away feeling, yes, the stress, the thing that I needed solved is actually going to be solved. And the easiest way for me to do that is to show you all the things that are going to happen and when they're going to happen by so that you don't have to worry about that.
That's really true. That's managing expectations. So that's I think, great practice. So shifting more to like practices that are a little larger, because we have a lot of people that watch us that have practices that are probably doing in the 3 to 7 mil range, usually multi-provider practices. So if I have a big practice, I'm very busy. I have multiple providers. I obviously already have payroll in place.
Yep.
I'm using it in an accounting firm right now. Maybe I'm not too happy with them because I'm not getting the data back I need to make decisions, or maybe I don't even know what data I need to make decisions. How might a firm like that approach you and say, hey, how can you help me with this? Because I'm trying to grow my business, but I don't have a lot of information. The only thing I get is at the end of the year, I get my tax thing and I get a little thing that says, hey, you need to pay this amount of money to the IRS.
It's a great question. And unfortunately, again, one that we see more often than I would like to see. At that level of business where they've hit a level of success, they're still trying to grow it. They're trying to get to a certain point. But we try to help them understand, and where we start with them, they will come to us saying, I want A, B, and C. Okay. And we listen to that and we write down, okay, you want A, B, and C. And then what we also tell them is, great. But before we go solve A, B, and C, let's take a wider scope of look at what you have to make sure that A, B, and C are actually the most important priorities for you. Because again, no disrespect, you may not be an expert in all the things that are related to your business. You may be a genius when it comes to being a practitioner, but that does not mean that you're a genius in being an attorney or entity structure or insurance or some of these other components of it, right? And so we like to start businesses that are more in that realm of things with a diagnostic, basically, where we go through and we can do it for them as an individual and a business, or we can do it as just a business. I like to do it at both because there's a lot of bleed over between like that. Again, that Venn diagram overlaps quite significantly when you look at those components of it. And we take them through that and we basically just document what they have. Okay, talk to me about what businesses you own. What is the percentage you own of it? What is the revenue that you're doing? What type of insurance do you have? What are your investments? All these sort of wide ranging of things. And then from that, we go, okay, here are the areas that we believe, based on what you told us, there are opportunities to improve, either in terms of reducing your risk, maybe diversifying in some capacity, maybe it's taking advantage of tax opportunities. Who knows what it is, right? But it isn't just about making more money. It's sometimes just about holistically improving your financial situation, if that makes sense. And then based upon that, we then make sure that we try to help them identify, say, 3 to 5 of the most important things, and we prioritize those. And what we find is, yes, usually one of the A, B, and C's that they came to us is part of that. But there's other things that after talking with them, they now realize, oh, that's way more important to me than what I thought this is. Or they understand the relationship between accomplishing C. For me to do that, I actually have to do 1, 2, and 3 over here. Otherwise, C can't happen. And so we help them get into that place. And then at that point, and this is maybe where it's a bit unique, is that we either work with the existing professionals they have in those areas of expertise, because we're not trying to replace them. We're not taking over the work for them, or we find them an expert to do that work. And here to me is the real difference, is that when you reach that level of, I'll say, success, like you just described, where you're doing like maybe 3 to 7 million in annual revenues. What I have found is that most people at that point start to view what is most important a little bit different. Yes, they still want to make more money. Yes, they still want to be successful. But they also realize that the singular asset that they have, they can never get more of, is their time. And they start to really place a value on, how can I, for lack of better words, buy back more of my time? Meaning, like, what can I do? Who can I pay to basically take stuff off my plate so that I can focus on the things I care more about? And this is where I think what I just described really resonates with people. Is a lot of professionals may do that assessment. They may do that diagnostic. They go, okay, Gary, here are the things that you need to go solve. And you basically are assigned homework as a client. So I didn't come here wanting homework. All you did was basically tell me, I have more things I need to fix. And I realized that's stressful. And now you're asking me to solve them. I'm not a professional in any of these areas. Like, now what do I do with this? And so instead, what we do is we actually will say, okay, great. We will take care of this. We will go manage the relationship. We will go find the professional. We will make sure that it's getting done for you. And all you have to do is show up and go, yes, that's what I wanted. Yes, let me sign that document. Yes, this is where I want to go. Or, you know what? I've had a change of heart. I want to do this instead. And what it does is it relieves a lot of the burden from them, that they are able to now focus on other areas, because they know that the money thing, which is often such a huge stressor for people, is being managed in a way that they could honestly never manage it. And that, again, is not a criticism or a slight against them as intelligence or anything. It's just a function of, they don't need to worry about it. So why spend energy on it when someone else can do it for you, probably in a better capacity?
That's a really great point. And it does seem that a lot of times when people first started out their businesses, and especially with medical entrepreneurs, that in a lot of cases, they're somewhat more ego driven initially, but then as they start to build out their business, you'll notice the ones that are the most successful have to get to a point where you're describing, where it's like, hey, I don't know everything. I need help. And they start to be less about, hey, I can figure this out and look how smart I am, to, hey, how can I build the best team of experts around me to manage that? So I think you have a really great point.
And I think the other piece of this, again, this is not meant to be a criticism, but what I often will see is the decisions that start to happen at that point is, oh, we haven't looked at our insurance in a while. Let's take a look. We can save some money there. And okay, great. Let me go shop this rate around. I just saved us $2,000 a year. That's awesome. On a $7 million practice, you saved $2,000 a year. Did you actually end up in a better place? And how much time did you spend relative to saving that $2,000? That to me is the question. Maybe you're better off, but you don't know definitively in often cases, right? And so maybe you saved $2,000, but you have an inferior policy relative to what you could have that may be better for you, given what you're doing within the practice business. And so what we try to help people understand is, oftentimes you come to us wanting an outcome. And so we have to help you understand is what has to happen for that outcome to occur. And oftentimes it isn't just a matter of flipping a switch. It's making sure that there is the right structure in place, that the right legal actions have been taken, that the right elections have been made, all of these things that sort of require experts in these areas to work together on to put this thing together such that when it comes time, say for taxes or to pick an insurance, that it is just a flip of the switch, that the work is not being done then because it's often too late at that stage.
That makes sense. One of the questions I wanted to ask you about was, a lot of times with entrepreneurs, we see that they have multiple businesses. So they'll have 3 to 5 different corporations and these kind of things. Is there anything that you could advise for someone who, for whatever reason, started to build a structure and now they have a medical practice, that's a company, they have something else?
The biggest thing for the instances of that, I would say, is oftentimes as that's happening, they're being, again, I know this is going to sound critical. I don't mean it to be, but it's a little bit of slapping bandages on things, right? Like I added this, I need to do this. Oh, I added this, I need to do this. Whereas if you step back and we're going to say, I'm going to do this all from the beginning, you would set it up different. that make sense?
Yes.
And so I
exactly.
think when you find yourself in a situation like that, asset protection, entity structure become incredibly important for how you manage that, because a couple things happen. One, you want to ensure that you are not exposing yourself from a legal standpoint or liability standpoint to lawsuits that don't need to be claimed, that someone doesn't sue company A that you own, and then they can look through to company B that you own to get more out of you. We don't want that. Because when you reach a certain level of wealth, people start to smell the money and they're like, oh, there's an opportunity for me to maybe shake this person down for some stuff. We don't want that. The second thing is that we want to make the movement of money within your financial setup to be as frictionless as possible. What I mean by that is that if you've got money coming from various sources, we want to be able to funnel it all to a singular place without drawing any additional tax complications to it. And so what we want to do is make sure that the structure of what you have in place allows that to happen. And so that's where entity structure comes into place as well. Then you get into things like, am I set up in the right state? Do I have maybe there's a better state for me to be registered in, maybe for me to legally be doing business in. So there's a whole host of things that when you start to look at that I think come into play that are not accounting specific related, but ultimately impact the accounting downstream. And that's what I was referring to before, is that we want to make sure that the things are done appropriately at the highest level, such that those rain clouds trickle down the rain and the water we need to make the flowers grow.
Oh, it makes sense. That's awesome. Any other advice that you might have for someone who is maybe thinking about starting a practice? And because I know we do get a lot of people that they're in what we call the mainstream healthcare system, mainstream medicine. They're burned out. They don't like the way that things are going in mainstream medicine, that they want to be able to use their skill set in a different way. And so for a lot of them, these are W-2 employees that are literally just looking to get out of the kind of the machine or whatever you want to call it. Any advice for people that want to start their own business from an accounting point of view or tax point of view?
Yes, although this may not be exactly an accounting or tax point of view, but hopefully this sort of answers your question or is helpful for people. What I have found to be true about business owners and human beings in general is that when we are faced with a decision, it's very binary for us. So the analogy I always use is I'm standing in front of a door and I can either go through the door or I can not go through the door. And to me, as I stand there in front of it, those are my only two options, right? Like it seems logical. I'm standing there that I can either open it, walk through, or I cannot. But the reality is what we fail to realize, because we're so narrowly focused on this door in front of us, we fail to see that there's an infinite number of doors in either direction that are stacked next to this that we can also walk through or not walk through. And the reason I mention that to people is that when you are sitting in a position where you're unhappy with the outcome you're getting, we often think, I either keep doing this or I do this one other thing. And what I would tell you is there is an infinite number of other things that you can do. They may not always be exactly what you expect them to be. And again, this kind of goes back to that expectation delta that we talked about, but that doesn't mean that they may not take you on the right path for yourself. And so what I would say is I would encourage you to pull yourself out of the detail in some capacity and be more open to the idea that there is more than one possible way to get what you want out of this. So if you're thinking about going out on your own, sometimes we get this, well, I have this idea. Great. I'm going to be honest with you. More likely than not, that idea that you came up with is not going to be the thing that you do. And it's not because it's not a good idea. It's just because it's the first idea. And so you need to allow yourself to think about that idea relative to other ideas and allow it to progress and grow and mushroom and manifest itself in ways. And when you allow yourself to do that, what you'll find is it's like the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, right? You're going to be like way off the path someplace, but realize that like you needed to take this sort of roundabout path to get you to where you. I realize that is not accounting or tax driven, but I do think it's incredibly important that when you're trying to make a decision like that or any important decision, that it isn't just one or the other. It isn't black or white. It isn't yes or no. It is this or any one of these other choices that are available to me. And that it's okay to try something maybe a bit unorthodox or that someone else doesn't understand. That is okay.
I think that's really great advice, because I feel like the entrepreneurial journey is just like you described there, where many times you go in a direction and, it seems like maybe it's a dead end or something like this. But the reality is that if you had never done that, you would have never met this person who then becomes critical for the next thing and so forth. And so much of life is like that. So that's very wise, Nolan. Good. That's a great thing. Just out of curiosity, is there anything that if someone, could you maybe describe like what kind of person, what type of medical entrepreneur that you could help the most and who should be reaching out to you now if they need help?
Yeah. So if you listened to me today and made it all the way through this podcast, congratulations. Thank you for sticking with us. If what I said at all resonated with you and you feel like maybe it would be helpful to talk, I do free consultations for clients. You can go to our website, which is bradfieldco.com. And there's a contact us page and there's a little form you can complete. Share a little bit about yourself. And based upon what I see, I respond to everyone. But if it makes sense, I'll say, hey, let's set up some time to talk and see if there's a way that we can support you or help you. In terms of who tends to be like the client we work with the most, especially like in the medical professional realm, it tends to be someone who is growth driven, meaning they're looking to scale the practice beyond where it's currently at. And that usually they have upwards of 750,000 in annual revenue, all the way up to 20 million in annual revenue. Those tend to be where we find the most success in terms of helping people, or meaning that people we work with, we're able to help the most. That's what I mean to say there. So you find yourself in that area, and it's okay if you have partners, maybe you're not the sole owner, but what we found is we can usually help people break down some of the things that are holding them back in the growth process and allow them to view things in a different light that will oftentimes let them get past wherever they feel like maybe they plateaued at, or solve some of the problems that maybe they're dissatisfied with within the business. So that tends to be it, but don't let that hold you back. Feel free to reach out if you like it, and we'll see if we can be of service to you.
That's awesome. Nolan, if people want to find out more about you, is there what's the best way to reach out to you? What's the best resources?
Yeah. So like I mentioned, you can find us on our website, bradfieldco.com. We talk about our services on there. There's a way to contact us. There's some other information that you read up on and more detail about how we work. You can also find me on LinkedIn, very creatively, Nolan Bradbury on LinkedIn. You can find us there, find me there. Feel free to connect with me, message me if that's an easier way to do it. I know sometimes people don't always want to give out their email. So if that's more up your alley, you can do it there. But either way, what I tell people is if something resonated with you that I said, just reach out. Like I'm a human being. I'm going to tell you if I can help you, and hopefully I can. But even if it's not me, I usually try to provide some sort of value back to the client when we talk. So hopefully what I mean is just reach out and hopefully I can give you something of value that will improve your day or make a difference on your situation.
I know you did here, man. You did a great job. And I think a lot of it is also, you can tell that you're an entrepreneur because you understand the journey. And so many times I run into accountants and these guys, and no disrespect to them, but they're not on the same journey. They don't understand the stresses of it. They don't understand why it's difficult to get your bank statements immediately. Or it's like, they don't understand you have 12 jobs plus a home life.
I appreciate that, because I would say a very core fundamental of me and my practice is empathy. We really do try to approach every relationship with empathy, because for us to really help someone, we have to understand them. And for us to understand them, we have to be able to relate to them and not just assume we know what they mean or they think or they say, but really get to know them and meet them on their level. So I appreciate that. I'm glad that came through. And that's a core principle. Yes.
Man, awesome. Such a great interview. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been a real pleasure to have you.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.